Hello, and welcome to Calvin University's FAFSA seminar for Fall 2020. This presentation includes two parts, beginning with an overview of financial aid for college students, followed by some questions directly on the FAFSA. The FAFSA has a lot of different questions, but we've handpicked a few that we thought would be helpful for you when you fill out the application. This information is really more so designed for seniors, but juniors and younger students are welcome as well. If you have questions at any time during this presentation, feel free to jot down our information here, either email or give us a call. We'd love to connect with you and answer any additional questions you may have. And although this is Calvin University hosting this presentation, this is more so a general overview than Calvin-specific information. Here is our roadmap for this presentation. We'll touch on a few big areas of the financial aid process, including the timeline for seniors in high school, the types of aid they may qualify for, how they become eligible for those different types of aid, and then ending with the FAFSA online. Here you'll see a financial aid timeline for seniors in high school. These are more so general dates, and deadlines can certainly vary from college to college. We do recommend students touch base with each college to learn more about their specific deadlines and other important dates to know. Generally speaking, colleges and universities will release their application for admission in August. Then, in October, the FAFSA will go live for the upcoming school year. So, for students enrolling in the 2021-2022 school year, students and parents can begin filing the FAFSA on October 1, 2020. Then, by February, students will often have received their financial aid package from each college. Some students may receive it before February, some after. It will also depend on when the student applied to each school. And finally, this all leads up to May, when students make a decision on where they'll go to school. Across the country, May 1 is known as the National Decision Day. On that day, students will decide where they'll attend. They'll pay a deposit to that school, and that will confirm their enrollment for the upcoming school year. Next, let's dive into the different types of aid that students may qualify for. Here you'll see a simple formula that all goes into a financial aid package for students. We do say financial aid package because they can really vary from student to student. For example, student A may qualify for 6 different items in their financial aid package, while student B may only see 1 or 2 items in theirs. Looking to the left on this formula here, you'll see scholarships as the first category of aid. We call scholarships merit-based aid because the student has met some type of criteria to qualify. For example, it could be that the student earned a specific GPA or SAT or ACT score and then qualified for a college's academic scholarship. Next, you'll see grants, which we also call need-based aid. Students demonstrate financial need by submitting the FAFSA, so it is required for students to submit the FAFSA each year to also qualify potentially for grants each year too. Scholarships and grants are similar in that they don't need to be repaid over time, while student loans will need to be repaid and they will have interest applied over time and after school. Let's spend a little bit more time on scholarships, or that first category of aid called merit-based aid. Scholarships can be awarded for a lot of different reasons, and you may already be familiar with scholarships as a college financial aid category. scholarships can be awarded because of academic performance or enrollment in a specific program, or maybe a club or activity the student does. Scholarship requirements can really vary from college to college, so we recommend students touch base with each college's financial aid office so they know what's required and when it's required. Some colleges, for example, may say we just need an application for students to apply for a scholarship, while others may have a more involved process of recommendation letters, applications, and something else. So be sure your student knows exactly what's needed per college so there's no surprises and no opportunities missed. College scholarships can also be offered by outside organizations and agencies. There's really two ways that students often find outside scholarships, beginning with looking locally. We often recommend students touch base with their guidance counselor or school counselor to see if they know of any scholarships that are available. You can also find outside scholarships at local foundations or organizations, through parent employers, and other places as well. Students can also find outside scholarships by searching online for organizations around the country. We typically recommend students look locally first, as there's less students who apply for those local scholarships, so there's a greater chance of a student being awarded one of those. We also recommend students apply for as many outside scholarships as possible, even if it's a small award, $500 or less. Multiple of those scholarships can really make a big difference over time. The benefit of outside scholarships is that they'll follow this to the student no matter where they attend school, whether the student goes to a small university or a large state college. That outside scholarship they've been awarded will follow them to that school. And finally, a really important tip to know is that outside scholarships should never have an application fee. They should always be free. If you find that an application is requesting money to be processed, it's likely a scam, so we recommend quitting that application. Let's touch base on the second category of financial aid, known as grants or need-based aid. Grants are tied to students filing the FAFSA, so we do recommend students file the FAFSA each year, so they may qualify for grants each year too. However, submitting the FAFSA does not guarantee that grants will be awarded to the student. There are 3 entities that can offer grants to college students, and so some students may see all 3 types in their financial aid package, some 2, some 1, and some none. Grants can first be awarded on the college or university level. However, grant amounts may vary, how they're awarded may vary, so we do recommend students talk to each individual college financial aid office to figure out how their grants are awarded and if the student may be eligible. Grants may be also offered at the state level. In Michigan, there is a State of Michigan grant available to college students. For the 2020-2021 academic year, the grant was set at $2,800. However, state funding for the grant may change, or how the grant is awarded may change, so it's not guaranteed that the State of Michigan grant will be offered to college students each year. If you or your student reside in another state, we recommend the student check with the college's financial aid offices in your state to see if they award their own state grants. The federal government can also offer grants to college students, including the Federal Pell Grant and Federal Supplemental Educational Grant. Those grants are awarded to students if they show significant financial need on their FAFSA. Some students may see both types of grants in their financial aid package, some may only see one. The federal government will also offer the Teach Grant to college students. This grant is less so based on the financial need of a student and more so based on students interested in going into teaching or education. If your student is considering teaching or education as their career, we do recommend students check out the U.S. Department of Education's website to learn more about this grant. This grant does have other requirements and a post-graduation commitment in order for students to receive this grant during college. So it's important the student knows the bigger details to get this grant. Typically, we recommend students file the FAFSA and other financial aid related forms by December 31 for maximum consideration of grants. Thinking back to the third category of aid for students would be student loans. The federal government does offer federal student loans to college students, but it does require students submit the FAFSA each year to be eligible. Whether students show a lot of resources on the FAFSA or very little resources, all students who submit the FAFSA will be eligible for federal student loans. The government does cap how much federal student loan money a student can receive each year of college. So, for example, first-year students are eligible for $5,500 in federal student loans. Second-year students are eligible for $6,500 in federal student loans. And juniors and seniors are eligible for $7,500 in federal student loans. Those are federally set limits, so whether your student is looking at a small private college or a large public college, they will see those same exact loan amounts available on their award letters. Students may see two different types of loans included on their financial aid package. They may see a subsidized loan or an unsubsidized loan. The difference between these loans is how interest is treated. So, for example, a subsidized loan will have the government paying off interest while the student is in school, so that loan won't grow over time. The unsubsidized loan, on the other hand, will have interest accrue right away, so another thing to know. Some students may qualify for both a subsidized loan and unsubsidized loan. Students are only eligible for the subsidized loan or interest-free loan while in college if they show financial need on their FAFSA. Interest rates are also set annually. For the 2020-2021 academic year, there's been a 2.75 fixed interest rate set for these loans. So for the life of the loan, that is the interest rate that will be applied. As I mentioned before, federal student loans are tied to students submitting the FAFSA. So although the FAFSA will look at parent information, these federal student loans are totally tied to the student, and they are the student's responsibility to repay. When a student receives their financial aid package, they'll see a lot of different numbers and information included. At the very top of the page, they'll see their cost of attendance, so the tuition of the school and room and board charge. Underneath that, they'll see an itemized list of all financial aid they're receiving, so scholarships, grants, and loans all in one place. At the very bottom of that letter, they will see the out-of-pocket cost, so what does the student owe to cover the bill? Some students may see very large out-of-pocket costs, some may only see a small out-of-pocket costs. It will really vary from student to student. If students see an amount that they know they need additional resources to cover the cost, families may consider then looking at outside loan opportunities to cover the bill. Here are two different loan opportunities that families will consider. On the left here, you'll see the Federal PLUS loan, which stands for Parent Loan for Undergraduate Students. In the case of the PLUS loan, the parent is the borrower, so it is also the parent's responsibility to repay. You'll notice there is a fixed interest rate of 5.3%. That is for the 2020-2021 school year. It's set annually, so it may go down, it may go up in future years. Another unique feature of the PLUS loan is an origination fee, which for 2020-2021 is 4.228%. That means 4.228% of the requested loan amount is used just to start the loan. In that case, the college doesn't see that money. It's more of a processing fee by the federal government. The PLUS loan is also connected to receiving the FAFSA first. So once a student files the FAFSA, if they need the PLUS loan, they can then go ahead and have their parents submit the PLUS loan application. The PLUS loan is deferrable, though it does require that parents select that on the application, that they'd like payments to defer until after the student's graduation. Private loans are a second category of outside loan opportunities. In the case of private loans, they're offered by banks, credit unions, other organizations. Private loans will often require a student and a cosigner to apply together. A cosigner can be anyone really, but it's often a parent, family member, or another trusted adult that feels comfortable signing on that loan application with the student. Private loans can be more selective on who they borrow to, so you'll see a more full credit evaluation conducted there than the PLUS loan, though private loans can also offer different rates, possibly better rates than the PLUS loan, so it's worth looking around and seeing the different private loan opportunities out there. In the case of both the PLUS loan and private loans, those loans, if approved, can cover any remaining unmet cost, whether it's $5,000, $10,000 per year, or more. Student employment is another potential resource for students to cover costs over the year. Students may be able to find on-campus employment or off-campus employment during the academic year or over their summer breaks. Colleges may also offer work-study positions to their students. However, these types of positions do require that students show a certain level of financial need on their FAFSA to qualify. And there is a place on the FAFSA where students can indicate their interest in work-study positions. Let's now move into the second part of this presentation, which more so focuses on the FAFSA. The FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It is a free application offered by the federal government, and it's something that will need to be filed by both parent and student each year. Here are some important things to know about the FAFSA, beginning with filing date. For students filing the 2021-2022 FAFSA, they can begin filing on October 1, 2020. The FAFSA will also always look for a specific tax year to include. It will always be 2 years prior. So for the 2021-2022 school year, parents and students will want to gather 2019 tax information to fill it out. Colleges will then use the information on the FAFSA to make financial aid determinations. At Calvin, we begin sending out financial aid packages in February. However, some colleges may offer their financial aid package sooner or later. It will also depend on when the student applied to that school. Students can use the financial aid package to help in their college decision. As I mentioned before, students will want to deposit ideally by May 1. Depositing will confirm their enrollment for the fall, save their spot, and ensure they're attending that college for the upcoming school year. Here are a few important features of the FAFSA, beginning with the FSA ID. Student and parent will both create their own FSA ID username and password, which they'll use each year to access, sign, and submit the FAFSA. Technically, creating the FSA ID is the first step to submitting the FAFSA. So you could go in today if you'd like, create your FSA ID, so when October 1 comes, you can file the FAFSA that day. The FSA ID is tied to a person's Social Security number, so each person will be assigned just one FSA ID. We do highly recommend double and triple checking the Social Security number you associate with this account. We, as a college, can't fix an incorrect Social Security number on an FSA ID. You will use the FSA ID to file the FAFSA each year, so keep that information close to you or somewhere you can easily access it. Creating the FSA ID will also require an email address, so we discourage students from using a high school email address, which may be deleted after they graduate. In the event that a student misplaces their username or password, they will need to have that email accessible to regain access to that information. Next, the save key is a temporary password you'll create at the beginning of the FAFSA. This is something you'll create each year, a new save key per year. Write down that information once you create it. It's a way to access the application if you need to step away midway through and keep your information saved as is. Next, skip logic. Depending how you answer the FAFSA, it may ask additional questions or it may skip ahead to a new section. Skip logic is intended to tailor the application to the applicant. There's also help features throughout the FAFSA application. You'll find at the end of many questions that there will be a blue bubble with a white question mark in the middle. If you scroll over that bubble, you'll get some clarification on what the question is asking. However, if that clarification doesn't quite get at the question you have, feel free to contact a financial aid office or sign into the Federal Student Aid website and use the chat feature there. A representative from the FAFSA will be able to clarify what the question is really asking. And finally, at the end here, you will see a time length of 30 minutes to 1 hour. The first time filing the FAFSA may take a little bit longer, closer to an hour, but the more familiar you are with the application, it may take closer to 30 minutes. You may be wondering what documentation you need to gather in order to completely fill out the FAFSA. Here you'll see a list of documents you should gather beforehand, which will make it easier filing of the FAFSA later, beginning with Social Security number or alien registration number. Both parent and student will need to gather their federal tax information or tax returns from 2 years prior. In the case of students filing the 2021-2022 FAFSA, you should gather those tax returns or tax information from 2019. You should also gather records of untaxed income, as well as information on different assets like cash, savings, checking account balances, investments, and real estate. Though you are reporting earnings and income from 2019, all assets are based on the day you file the FAFSA. Though the FAFSA will ask many questions, there are over 100 questions on the application. There are certain questions that have more weight and influence when determining financial aid eligibility, beginning with parent income. Parent assets will also have some weight there too. Parent assets, as mentioned before, talk about stocks, bonds, money in the bank, things like that. There are 2 parent assets that do not need to be reported on the FAFSA, starting with the primary home and then retirement accounts. However, if parents own a second property or residence, maybe a beach house or a cottage along the lake, that second residence will need to be reported on the student's FAFSA. Business and farm value should also be included. However, you do not need to include equity in a family business or farm, which means students' parents who own more than 50% of a business or farm and have less than 100 employees do not need to report that business or farm. However, income from the family farm or business should be included as FAFSA income information. Size of the family or number in household is also considered, as well as number of siblings in college. If parents are returning to school or attending college courses, they do not need to include themselves in that number in college. Student income and assets will also be considered, as well as age of older parent. Age of oldest parent is connected to an asset protection allowance, which allows parents to save more so for retirement than for their students' college education. You may find when filing the FAFSA that your family's financial information has changed or looks differently than 2 years ago. Therefore, colleges have created a special circumstances form that can be submitted in addition to the FAFSA as a way to update the FAFSA for new information or to add information that the FAFSA doesn't originally ask about. When you file the FAFSA, you'll still answer the information as is, so if it asks for 2019 income, you'll still submit that information, but you'll submit the special circumstances form afterward. Each college has created their own special circumstances form, so log into each college's website to access this form and submit that additional information individually. Here are some circumstances that are considered for the special circumstances form, including job loss or income reduction for parents, if families are paying for a private school tuition for other siblings, if families reside in a higher cost of living area, if parents themselves are paying for college costs or going back to school, if families have experienced exceptional medical or dental out-of-pocket expenses, or other circumstances that have come up that are affecting the student's ability to pay for college. We certainly encourage all families to submit this form if it's relevant. However, submitting the form does not guarantee a change in financial aid for students. All information submitted on the FAFSA and then the special circumstances form if relevant boils down to create an EFC or expected family contribution. Because the EFC is tied to a FAFSA, all colleges who receive a student's FAFSA will see the same EFC. Colleges use the EFC as a way to divvy up their resources. It's somewhat of a distribution tool. Students that show a high EFC indicate they have a lot of resources available for college, so they may qualify for less or no need-based aid. On the flip side, students that show a low EFC indicate they have fewer resources available for school, so they're more likely to qualify for need-based aid. Colleges will do their best to meet the financial need of a student. However, they are working with limited resources, so it's unlikely colleges will be able to fill that full financial need of the student, and it's likely parents and students are expected to pay something towards tuition and other expenses. The EFC may feel somewhat abstract, so here's a way to speak about it in more concrete terms. Here you'll see our formula for determining financial need. It includes cost minus EFC equals need. When we're speaking about cost, we're talking about two different parts. The first part being direct costs, or tuition and room and board expenses, as well as indirect costs, which refers to more books, supplies, and day-to-day expenses of the student. A student's EFC, or expected family contribution, is more of a starting point than a definite number that students will have to pay. For example, if a FAFSA shows a student has a $15,000 EFC, it's likely the student will pay $15,000 or more per year to cover the bill. Colleges also are only able to meet often a portion of a student's financial need. So through this formula, if a student shows $20,000 in financial need, colleges may only offer $10,000 or $15,000 in financial aid to meet that student's need. To speak about EFC even more concretely, let's look at how it plays out in different college settings. We'll look first at private colleges, then public colleges, and then community colleges. In all of these examples, this student will show a 10,000 EFC on their FAFSA. To start here with private college, let's say it costs $40,000 to attend. We subtract the 10,000 EFC of the student, and the student then shows $30,000 in financial need. Though the student shows $30,000 in financial need, it's likely the private college will only meet a portion of that, whether it's $20,000, $25,000, or something else, which then means the student is likely to pay $10,000 or more per year to cover their part of the bill. For comparison, now let's see how the EFC plays out for a public college. For simple math, let's say it costs $20,000 per year to attend a public college. In this case, we subtract 10,000 EFC from $20,000 in cost, and this student shows $10,000 in financial need. And finally, as a third comparison point, let's see how EFC plays out for the community college student. For simple math, we'll say it costs $5,000 per year to attend this community college. When we do $5,000 in cost minus the student's 10,000 EFC, this student shows no financial need. That's not to say the student won't qualify for scholarships. It just means the student won't qualify for need-based aid like grants and subsidized student loans. Here you'll see the landing page for the FAFSA. This is the page that you'll head to each year when you want to file a new application. I do want to draw attention to the link included at the top of the screen, which shows studentaid.gov. By going to this website, it ensures you're filling out the real application, which will always be free. You should never have to pay to file the FAFSA. Here you'll see the first question answered by the student. On this page, you'll indicate if your student is a new user or returning user. Click the New User option if this is the first time your student is filing, or click the Returning User option if your student has previously filed and is now filing a new application for the upcoming school year. Once you select the New User or Returning User options on the FAFSA's landing page, you'll be brought to a login screen. Here you'll have two ways you can begin the FAFSA, either by entering it as the student or as a parent, preparer, or student from a freely associated state. If you choose the I am the student tab on the left-hand side, the student will be prompted to enter their FSA ID username and FSA ID password. If instead you click the right-hand tab, the parent will then be prompted to add additional information about their student, including student's first name, last name, social security number, and student's date of birth. Adding this information ensures it's the right student for the right application. Typically, we recommend student and parents sit together to complete this and do it in one setting. Once the student's logged in, they can begin the application. Here, you'll see a button that says Start 2020-2021 FAFSA. When October 1 comes, there will be a second button added that says Start 2021-2022 FAFSA. Be sure to select the right FAFSA year. There's no way to transfer over information if a student has filled in the incorrect year's application. Instead, the student will need to submit a new FAFSA for the correct year. To walk through this presentation, we have created a fake student called Calvin University, so you'll see their name pop up throughout this presentation. Before starting the first set of questions on the FAFSA, you will need to create a save key. The save key is a temporary password that you'll use during the application. If you need to step away and return to the application later, you can enter the save key and keep all your information as is. You won't need to restart a new application. The save key should be between 4 and 8 characters long, and we typically recommend write that down once you create it so you don't forget it later. And as a reminder, the FSA ID and save key are two different login information pieces. The save key is created each time you start a new FAFSA application each year, while the FSA ID is used annually to start, sign, and submit the FAFSA. Here is the first set of questions on the FAFSA, and they're specifically about the student. Throughout the application, you'll see a progress bar at the top of your screen, which shows all sections of the FAFSA. If you ever want to go back and correct something or add something new, you can always go to a prior tab and jump to that past section. The FAFSA will also include reminder notes throughout the application. Here, for example, you'll see the blue box that says, because the FAFSA belongs to the student, you and your always refer to the student. Just a reminder to keep the correct information in the right places. You'll start by entering in some information about the student, including first name, last name, date of birth. Once that's done, click Next. Next, students will start answering questions about their education. I do want to draw attention to the last question included here, which asks about work study. As you can see, there's 3 different ways that students can respond to this question: yes, no, and don't know. Typically, we do recommend students answer yes or don't know. By answering that way, students are not committing to anything long-term, they're just leaving the door open for later. A few pages forward, you'll see a question about selective service. Male students who are 18 or older at the time of filing the FAFSA must register for the selective service. Registration is required for students to receive any type of federal student aid. Students that are 17 or younger at the time of filing the FAFSA are not required to register and won't need to file or register later that year either. It will catch up to them eventually when they file the FAFSA again and are 18 years old. Here you'll indicate if your student is male or female. If they are male, they'll receive 2 additional questions. First, are you registered with the selective service? If they answer yes, that will be the last question. If they answer no, they will be prompted to answer an additional question that says, do you want us to register you with the selective service? We recommend selecting yes for this. It allows the selective service system to do registration behind the scenes, and it saves you a trip to the post office. After answering a few more questions about the student, you'll then move on to the second section of the form known as school selection. In this section of the form, you'll add colleges and universities that will receive their own copy of the student's FAFSA. There are two ways to add a college or university to a FAFSA application, the first being adding the federal school code, which you can find online in Google. If you don't know a college or university's federal school code, you can also use a search feature that's inputted into the FAFSA. Using the search feature will include adding the state of the college, city, and school name. Once you enter that information, you'll click Search and receive a list of schools that exactly or closely match the search information you've entered. Select the right college and click Next if you'd like to move on with the application. If there's additional schools you'd like to add, you can click the Add More Schools option at the bottom of the page. The FAFSA only allows students to enter up to 10 colleges at one time. If your student is interested in 11 or more colleges, there's an easy way to add colleges later on. Once the student has added their first 10 colleges, they'll go through the rest of the application and submit it. They can always go back and make corrections on the application and add new schools. Deleting a prior school will not remove the FAFSA from that school's application database. It just allows more schools to receive their own copy of the student's FAFSA. Once the student adds all colleges and universities to their FAFSA, they'll then indicate where they'll live for each campus. There's 3 options students can choose from, including on campus, with parents, or off campus. If the student's housing plans change midway through the year, that's an easy fix. Either the student can go back into their FAFSA and make corrections, or you can notify the individual school so they have updated information on their end. We're now on to the third section of the form known as dependency status. The federal government labels students in 2 ways, either as a dependent student or an independent student. In the case of dependent students, parents' financial information needs to be included on the FAFSA. And on the flip side, of the case of independent students, parent information does not need to be included. We often get the question from parents, do I need to include my financial information if I can't or won't financially support my student over the year? The answer to that question is yes, unless the student meets certain circumstances to make them an independent student, parent information will be required on the FAFSA. Independent student circumstances are very specific, very black and white, and the questions that follow this slide indicate and help the FAFSA figure out if the student is independent or dependent. Beginning with this question, what is your marital status as of today? Students will then answer questions about their dependents if they have any, beginning with if they have children who receive more than half their support from the student, or other dependents not including children or a spouse who live with the student and who receive more than half their support from the student. Here are a few additional questions to determine if the student is an independent student, beginning with if the student is serving currently as active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces, or if the student is a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces. It also asks if after the student turned 13, were both parents deceased, was the student in foster care, or was the student a dependent or ward of the court? Also asks if the student was an emancipated minor at any time, or if other than the parent or step-parent, if there was another person who had legal guardianship of the student. If none of these circumstances apply, click None of the above, the last box, and then proceed to click Next. And finally, the last question to determine dependency status of the student is about homelessness or risk of homelessness. After all those questions are answered, you'll find out the final result, which in this case, the FAFSA has determined that the student is a dependent student, so parent information is required. You'll then see at the bottom that you can either select I will provide parent information or I am unable to provide parent information. In this case, you'll want to select I will provide parent information and click Next. We've now moved on to section 4 of the form called Parent Demographics. Here is where parents will start answering questions about themselves, so they'll be more of the driver of the application during this section. The first question about parents will be their marital status and other related questions. We often get questions from parents of divorce situations of who should be included on the student's FAFSA. FAFSA does give some guidelines on this, and they recommend first deciding which parent spends more time with the student over the past 12 months. If time is spent really equally between parents, you'll then look to decide which parent has financially invested more in the student over the past 12 months. Once decided, that parent should be the one to enter their FAFSA information. If that parent has remarried, the step-parent should also be included on the FAFSA, even if at time of filing taxes 2 years ago, the parents were not married. On this page, parents will indicate the household size, so all people living in their house. You'll also see some clarification on who you should include in that number too. At the bottom of the page, you'll see number in college, so how many children will be in college for the upcoming school year. And this is just a reminder, parents going back to school or enrolling in college courses do not need to include themselves in that number in college. We've now moved on to section 5 of the form called Parent Financials. At the top of the page, you'll see a reminder box that says, "Attention, you must provide financial information from your parents' 2018 tax return on the following pages." For those filing the FAFSA for the 2021-2022 school year, you'll instead gather 2019 tax returns and other financial documents. This page will also ask a few questions about parents' filing status, and those 3 questions help the FAFSA determine if the parent can be linked to the IRS data retrieval tool. The IRS data retrieval tool is a tool used to pull parents and students' financial information from the Treasury's website and database. Using the tool really eliminates errors in reporting your financial information, as it ensures the information reported here reflects accurately what's on the Treasury's database. Using the IRS data retrieval tool is safe, it's a secure transfer of information, and there's not been any instances of theft of any kind through using that tool. Here is where parents will enter their FSA ID, username, and password. If you'd like to go to the IRS data retrieval tool, click Next. If you don't feel comfortable going that route, you can click the other button there on the left, Skip IRS data retrieval tool. By clicking that second button, parents will be prompted to manually enter their financial information into the student's FAFSA. You can certainly go that route, however, there is a chance that colleges will flag the student's FAFSA for verification. Verification is a process where colleges will request personal tax and income information from parent and student to ensure it matches the student's FAFSA. Once parents enter their FSA ID username and password, they'll then be notified they're leaving the FAFSA application and entering into the IRS website. Here you'll see a request for information from your federal income tax return. On this specific page, it shows a bit of an outdated screenshot for 2017 federal income tax information. For those filing for the 2021-2022 school year, you'll instead reference your 2019 federal income tax return. Know that the questions asked here and what's asked for 2019 will be the same. You'll then go through and answer all questions asked here and be sure to enter information here exactly as it appears on your federal income tax return. Once you've answered all questions, click Submit. You'll see there on the left-hand side, and you'll then see the result of the information you've added. If all information matches, you then have the opportunity to transfer that information directly to the student's FAFSA. Click the first box at the bottom there that says Transfer my tax information into the FAFSA form and click Transfer Now. Once parent information is transferred from the IRS's website, you'll then be brought back into the FAFSA for additional questions. Here, the FAFSA will ask about earnings for each parent from 2019 for those filing the 2021-2022 school year. The reason the FAFSA asks for this additional information is that it's not gathered when you use the IRS data retrieval tool. The IRS data retrieval tool will only look at adjusted gross income for 2019, not parent earnings for that year. You'll continue answering parent information about assets. The only question you'll see originally on this page is the first one, which is, as of today, does the total amount of your parents' current assets exceed $6,000? With answers of yes and no. Not all parents will see this $6,000 amount. That amount is connected to the age of the oldest parent, how close they are to retirement, and their income protection allowance. If you answer yes, you have more than $6,000 or whatever amount they list there, you'll see some other questions pop up. This is an example of the skip logic we had mentioned before, beginning with total current balance of cash, savings, and checking accounts as of the day you're filing the FAFSA. It will then ask about net worth of parents' investments, including real estate, though with the reminder not to include the parent's primary home in that amount. And finally, it will look at and ask about the net worth of parents' current businesses and/or investment farms. So be sure to enter all that information and click Next. You'll then do the same exact thing for the student, where you'll connect them to the IRS data retrieval tool to pull their information from the IRS's website. Here you'll want to have their 2019 income tax return available for referencing when filling out the IRS data retrieval tool. You'll also answer those 3 questions regarding the student's filing status and the form they completed. If your student did not file in the requested tax year, there will be an option that says did not file for that first question. So you can enter that and you'll forego the entire IRS data retrieval tool process for this application. Same process for the student here as it was for the parents. If you do elect to do the IRS data retrieval tool, you'll be brought back to the FAFSA application afterward to answer a few additional questions, like this one. What were the wages, salaries, tips, etc. for the student in 2019? And just like in the case of parents, it will also ask about the student's different assets. So cash, savings, and checking accounts as of the day filing the FAFSA, investments as of the day filing the FAFSA, and net worth of current businesses and/or investment farms as of the day you file the FAFSA. Here, you'll be provided a summary of all FAFSA questions you've answered. I've only included the top portion of the summary and bottom portion, but no, it's a very long summary with all your information included. You can go through here, make sure all information is accurate. If you feel comfortable with your answers, you can scroll to the bottom of the page and click Next. Once you've reached this page on the left, Signature Status, you're into the final steps of the application. Here, both student and parent will electronically sign the application. Both signatures are required for colleges to process their FAFSA and see the information there. If either signature is missing, the application will look blank to colleges, so financial aid determinations can't be made. In that case, often colleges will reach out individually to students or parents to remind them to add a signature. Once both signatures are added, you can submit the application and you'll see the right-hand side here which says congratulations, you've finished the application. You'll also see a few additional pieces of information, including what happens next, as well as the estimated expected family contribution for the student. Thanks so much for joining us to go through the FAFSA. It can feel like a lot of information at once, so if you have any questions about anything we've touched on here, feel free to contact us at this phone number or email, and we'd be glad to connect with you. And as a reminder too, not all FAFSA questions were included in this presentation, so when you fill out the application in real time, you'll see additional questions asked. Thanks so much for spending time with us today, and we wish your student the best as they begin their college search.